Hello, and thank you for choosing this heartfelt, modest historical romance by E.Mallery. Before we get started, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support is appreciated and helps us continue bringing you more captivating tales, completely free. In each story are bits and pieces of true accounts of my personal life. So grab a pillow and make yourself at home and let your imagination transport you to a world of love, courage, and adventure in a time long past. Enjoy the story. Will Jack's secret past catch up to him? Will things change forever? Follow Riley as she answers that question. This is a love story about second chances, hidden potentials, and the transformative power of the heart and of the truth. Join us as we witness Jack Hudson discover himself, and Riley, who also discovers him. A story with a happy ending. Here's theirs. Welcome to Jack the Bull Rider. Copyright E.Mallery, Chapter 1, Dust and Serendipity. The Montana sky, a vast, unbroken canvas of cerulean, pressed down with the weight of a summer afternoon. Below, the land stretched, an endless tapestry of sun-baked earth and sagebrush shimmering under the relentless gaze of the sun. Jack Hudson, astride his sturdy quarter-horse, Buck felt the familiar grit of dust clinging to his skin, settling into the lines etched around his eyes. Each gust of wind, hot and dry, stirred the fine ochre powder from the hooves of his small herd, creating miniature swirling tornadoes in their wake. His younger brother Billy, a gangly shadow at the flanks, kept the cows moving with quiet efficiency. This drive to the Indian Creek auction was a ritual, a passage of seasons, but today, a quiet, persistent knot of anxiety tightened in Jack's gut. The Hudson Ranch, a legacy passed down through generations, felt thinner, more fragile than usual. These few head of cattle, their hides dulled by the summer sun, weren't just livestock. They were a gamble, a desperate hope for a better tomorrow, a lifeline against the encroaching tide of debt. Every lowing call, every swish of a tail, felt weighted with unspoken prayers. A distant disturbance caught Jack's eye, a larger, more vigorous plume of dust rising from the horizon, steadily growing in size. It wasn't the languid drift of another cattle drive. This cloud moved with purpose, its shape hinting at something faster, more compact. He squinted, his hand automatically shading his eyes against the glare. As it drew closer, the distinct outline of a wagon emerged, piled high with a chaotic, horned cargo that caught the sunlight in playful flashes. It was pulled by a pair of stout, well-muscled draft horses, their strides powerful and even, and at the reins, a woman. She handled the team with an easy, almost innate confidence that sent a surprising ripple of admiration through Jack. Her hair, the color of spun moonlight, was braided tightly and tucked beneath a practical, wide-brimmed hat, but a few rebellious strands had escaped, framing a face smudged with dust and kissed by the sun, yet radiating a captivating spirit. Her shoulders were broad, her posture straight, hinting at a quiet strength. She reined in her team with a soft, "Whoa there," the wagon's wooden wheels groaning to a halt alongside his shuffling cattle. Her eyes, the startling clear blue of a summer sky, met his, and a genuine, unhurried smile touched her lips. She had the most beautiful teeth. "Well, howdy there, cowboy," she called out, her voice clear and melodious, cutting through the lowing of his cows and the insistent bleating of her goats. "Looks like we're headed to the same dusty destination." Jack tipped his hat, the brim a familiar weight on his brow. "Howdy, ma'am. Jack Hudson. These are my partners in crime." He gestured with his chin towards his cows, then to Billy, who offered a shy, almost imperceptible wave from behind the herd. "You headed to the Indian Creek auction, I reckon?" "That's the plan, and a fine plan it is," she confirmed, her gaze sweeping over his herd with a knowing, professional eye. "Riley Bannon, and these," she patted the shaggy rump of a particularly large, horned goat near the front of her wagon, "are my prize winners. Couldn't fit all of them, but these ladies are going to make me a pretty penny, I hope." There was a hint of determination in her tone, a shared understanding of the stakes involved in their respective journeys. They fell into an easy, companionable rhythm as their paths merged, the shared destination forging an instant, unspoken connection. Riley spoke with a quiet passion about her goat farm. a passion project she'd poured her heart into after inheriting a small, overgrown plot of land from her grandmother. She recounted the trials and triumphs of raising her quirky, intelligent herd, the unexpected joys of cheesemaking, and the sheer grit it took to make a living from the land. Jack, in turn, found himself opening up about the relentless challenges of ranching, the fickle nature of the Montana weather, the endless repairs, and the sheer, bone-deep satisfaction of seeing a calf born healthy. They talked about the small, profound beauties of their shared existence, the intoxicating scent of sagebrush after a rare rain, the way the vast, unpolluted night sky blazed with 1,000,000 stars, each one a tiny, distant fire. He learned she loved to read, especially adventure stories of far-off lands, and harbored a quiet dream of one day seeing the vast, shimmering expanse of the ocean. She discovered Jack had a surprising, gentle talent for carving intricate wooden figures during the long, quiet evenings, and that his favorite sound in the world was the soft, contented hum of his horses in the morning light. By the time the first faint, shimmering outlines of Indian Creek appeared on the horizon, a cluster of buildings rising like a mirage from the dusty plains, Riley had such a pull towards her he hadn't anticipated, a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. It was more than just shared interests, more than easy conversation. It was a deeper understanding, a quiet recognition of kindred spirits traveling the same dusty path, and each carrying their own burdens and dreams, yet finding a surprising lightness in their shared company. A sense of belonging, a quiet hum of contentment, had begun to settle over him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Chapter 2. A perfect distraction. The Indian Creek auction yard was a vibrant, chaotic symphony. The air thrummed with the low, resonant bellows of cattle, the sharp, insistent bleating of sheep and goats, and the rapid-fire cadence of the auctioneer's voice, a rhythmic chant rising above the general hum of a bustling town. The scent of hay, manure, and freshly brewed coffee mingled in the warm air, a pungent, earthy blend that was the very breath of the auction, a promise of honest work and hard-won gains. Jack and Billy, working in practiced unison, managed to get their cows settled into a holding pen. Then, Jack turned to Riley, offering a hand to help her unload her spirited goats from the wagon. Their fingers brushed as he guided a particularly stubborn nanny, and a jolt of warmth, quick and unexpected, shot through him. Riley's laugh, light and genuine, filled the space between them as the last goat hopped down. The sun, a fiery orb, was beginning its slow, majestic descent, painting the fiery western sky. Riley turned to him, her blue eyes sparkling with a mischievous glint, a smudge of dirt on her face only adding to her charm. "So, what do you say, Jack Hudson?" she asked, her voice laced with an adventurous spirit. "My goats are settled. Your cows are ready to fetch a fair price. You've got to be famished after that long, dusty drive. How about we grab some supper at the saloon? My treat." Jack's stomach rumbled a hearty agreement, but it was more than just hunger that made him grin, a genuine, uninhibited curve of his lips. "I'd like that very much, Riley. But supper's on me. A gentleman always pays." The Indian Creek Saloon was a lively affair, a haven of boisterous camaraderie, the only place in town to get a hot meal. The rich aroma of fried chicken and sizzling steak filled the air. They found a small scarred wooden table tucked away in a corner, a little pocket of quiet amidst the jovial chaos. Over plates piled high with hearty home-style food, their conversation flowed effortlessly, picking up where it had left off on the trail. Riley recounted a hilarious, vivid tale of a particularly mischievous goat named Barnaby, who had once escaped her farm and led the entire town on a merry, bleating chase. Jack, emboldened by her unrestrained laughter, found himself sharing a story about a notoriously stubborn bull named Goliath who had once refused to move for an entire day, much to his exasperation and the amusement of his father. As the evening deepened, the light from the oil lamps casting a warm glow on their faces, Riley leaned forward, her expression thoughtful, her eyes bright with curiosity. "So, Jack Hudson," she began, a playful challenge in her voice. "What else do you do besides wrangle cows and carve beautiful wooden figures? Any other hidden talents I should know about?" A faint, unaccustomed flush touched Jack's sun-kissed cheeks. He usually kept this part of his life quiet, a private pursuit, but with Riley, it felt different, less like a secret and more like a shared discovery. "Well," he began, a small, almost shy smile playing on his lips. I dabble in the rodeo a bit. Bull riding, mostly. Just for fun, you understand?" He shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant, but a spark of pride flickered in his eyes. Riley's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine excitement and admiration in their depths. "No kidding. Bull riding? That's incredible. I love watching the rodeo. I haven't been to one in ages. Is there one coming up soon, by any chance?" Her enthusiasm was infectious and bright, an eager energy that made his heart quicken. Jack hesitated for a moment, a sudden, exhilarating idea taking root in his mind. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not just interest, but a genuine desire to share in his world. "As a matter of fact," he said, his voice a little rougher than he intended, "Indian Creek is hosting its annual town rodeo tomorrow. It's a small-time affair, nothing fancy, but usually a good turnout. And I usually compete." He held his breath, waiting for her reaction. Her smile was radiant, a pure, unadulterated beam of delight that seemed to chase away any lingering shadows in the saloon. "That's perfect, absolutely perfect. I'd love to watch you, Jack. Consider it our first date, if you're agreeable." His heart gave a surprising, joyful lurch. A date. He hadn't been on one in so long, not a real one, not one that felt so full of promise. The thought of it, with Riley, filled him with a quiet, blossoming joy that settled deep in his chest. "It's a date then, Riley," he confirmed, his voice now a low, steady rumble, the words feeling right, solid, true. The next day dawned bright and clear, the air crisp with the invigorating promise of a beautiful autumn day. The rodeo grounds were already buzzing with anticipation, a vibrant tapestry of colorful banners, makeshift food stalls, and eager spectators. The sweet, buttery scent of popcorn mingled with the earthy aroma of dust and horses, creating a heady perfume of excitement. Jack, dressed in his worn but meticulously clean chaps and a brightly colored, embroidered shirt, felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, a potent mix of nerves and exhilaration, as he watched the other riders warm up. He scanned the stands, his gaze searching, and then he caught Riley's eye. She was seated near the front, her silver hair shimmering in the morning sun, her hat tilted just so. She gave him a confident thumbs up, her face alight with a dazzling, encouraging smile that seemed to settle some of the nerves that had begun to coil in his stomach. When his name, Jack Hudson, boomed over the crackling loudspeaker, a hush fell over the crowd, a collective intake of breath. He nodded to the gate-hand, his jaw set, took a deep, centering breath, and swung himself onto the broad, muscled back of a bull named Thunderclap, a beast notorious for his unpredictable power. The gate burst open with a deafening clang, and the world exploded into a blur of raw power, instinct, and a primal dance between man and beast. He held on, muscles straining, tendons screaming, the roar of the crowd a distant, muffled echo. Every buck, every twist, every sudden drop was a challenge, a test of his resolve, a battle of wills. He focused, his mind clear, his body moving in a fluid, almost unconscious rhythm with the powerful animal. Chapter 3. A new chapter begins. The air in the rodeo arena still hummed with the lingering echoes of excitement, the scent of churned earth and victory thick and sweet. But for Jack, the true triumph wasn't the buckle he'd soon receive, nor the roar of the crowd. It was the way Riley's eyes shone, reflecting the setting sun and an undeniable awe when he climbed back into the stands, dust-streaked and exhilarated. "Jack Hudson," she exclaimed, her voice still brimming with genuine wonder. "You were magnificent. Truly, I had no idea you were so daring." He laughed, a genuine booming sound that rarely escaped him with such unrestrained joy. "It's just another day at the office, ma'am," he quipped, but his gaze lingered on hers, and the warmth in her eyes, the sheer admiration, told him she understood it was more than that. He felt a profound sense of pride, not just in his win, but in sharing this raw, exhilarating part of himself with her and seeing it reflected back with such open delight. They lingered for a while, soaking in the festive atmosphere, the taste of victory sweet on Jack's tongue, the shared excitement a palpable current between them. As the sun dipped lower, casting long purple shadows across the arena and painting the clouds in fiery streaks, Jack turned to Riley, a hopeful question in his eyes, a new kind of anticipation bubbling in his chest. "The family's probably wondering where I've gotten to," he began, his voice softening. "I was thinking, if you're not too tired and if you'd be agreeable, maybe you could come back to the ranch. Meet Mom and Dad, have some of Mom's famous apple pie." The invitation hung in the air, a fragile offering. Riley's smile softened, a gentle warmth radiating from her that seemed to chase away the last vestiges of the day's dust. Her eyes, still shining, met his with an open, trusting gaze. "I'd like that very much, Jack," she said, her voice a quiet affirmation that settled deep in his heart. The drive back to the Hudson Ranch was bathed in the soft, ethereal glow of twilight. The vast, sprawling landscape, now a familiar comfort to Jack, felt imbued with a new sense of possibility, a quiet magic, with Riley beside him. The old farmhouse, its windows glowing with welcoming golden light, seemed to breathe a sigh of contentment as they pulled up the gravel drive. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a promise of warmth and home. Sarah Hudson, Jack's mother, a woman with a gentle smile that crinkled the corners of her kind eyes and capable, flour-dusted hands, greeted them at the door. Her eyes, sharp and perceptive, twinkled with a mixture of curiosity and approval as they took in Riley. His father, Thomas, a man of few words but deep integrity and a quiet strength, emerged from the shadows of the porch, offering Riley a firm, calloused handshake and a knowing nod that spoke volumes. Billy, usually reserved and prone to disappearing into the background, beamed at Riley, clearly impressed by her presence and the easy way she carried herself. The evening unfolded with an effortless grace, filled with the comforting aroma of freshly baked apple pie and the easy hum of conversation. Riley, with her genuine interest in their lives and her infectious, melodic laughter, effortlessly charmed the Hudson family. She spoke of her goats, her dreams for her burgeoning farm, and listened intently as Sarah, her eyes sparkling, recounted tales of Jack's childhood exploits, his early clumsy attempts at riding, his stubborn streak, much to his mock embarrassment, and the family's shared amusement. He watched her, a quiet contentment settling over him, a profound realization taking root. She fit. She fit into his world, into the rhythm of his family, as seamlessly as if she had always been there. As the night deepened and the first bright stars began to pepper the inky canvas of the sky, Riley helped Sarah clear the table, their voices a soft, companionable murmur drifting from the kitchen. Jack found himself sitting with his father on the porch swing, the familiar creak of the chains a comforting backdrop to their quiet conversation. The air was cool now, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. "She's a good woman, son," Thomas said, his gaze fixed on the distant dark silhouette of the mountains, his voice a low, steady rumble. Jack nodded, a warmth spreading through him, a feeling of deep satisfaction. "She is, Pa. She truly is." He paused, the words hanging in the crisp night air, a new thought, a familiar tremor of unease forming in his mind. Riley knew about his present, the ranch, the rodeo, his family. She saw the man he was now, the man he was trying to be. But she didn't know about his past, the shadow that sometimes crept into his thoughts, the reason for the quiet knot of anxiety he sometimes carried, the unspoken stories that haunted his quieter moments. It was a past he kept carefully guarded, a chapter he hadn't yet been able to open, a story he hadn't yet been able to tell anyone. Not even Riley. He wondered, with a pang of apprehension, if, when the time came, she would understand. For now, however, under the vast, star-dusted sky, with Riley's soft laughter drifting from the warm, inviting glow of the kitchen, he allowed himself to simply bask in the hopeful promise of a new, unfolding chapter. Chapter 4. Whispers and Wonders. The days that followed the Indian Creek Rodeo blurred into a golden haze for Jack. Riley, with her easy laughter and genuine curiosity, had settled into the rhythm of the Hudson Ranch as if she were a long-lost piece of the puzzle. She stayed for a week, ostensibly to discuss future goat sales with Jack's father, but mostly, she and Jack found themselves drawn together, their conversations stretching late into the twilight hours on the porch, or punctuated by shared tasks around the ranch. He showed her the intricacies of mending fences, the quiet art of guiding a herd, and the breathtaking sweep of the land from the highest ridge on their property. Riley, in turn, taught him the delicate process of milking a goat, the science behind cheesemaking, and the surprising intelligence of her prize winners. One afternoon, while mending a broken gate, a sudden fierce Montana squall rolled in, unleashing a torrent of rain and wind. They scrambled to secure the last of the livestock, working shoulder to shoulder, soaked to the bone and laughing breathlessly as they wrestled with a flapping tarp. In that moment, amidst the chaos of the storm, Jack felt an undeniable surge of connection, a deep, quiet joy in facing the elements with her. "You're a natural, Jack Hudson," she teased, wiping rain from her eyes, her face streaked with mud but alive with exhilaration. "Who knew a bull rider could be so handy with a hammer and a goat?" He grinned, pushing wet hair from his forehead. "And you, Miss Bannon, are a force of nature. Never met a woman who could outwork my brother and still look like she stepped out of a painting." Their eyes met with an ease, followed by a charged silence, the rain slowing down to a gentle patter, and the air, washed clean, smelled as fresh as the Montana plain. Jack reached out, his calloused thumb gently brushing a stray drop of water from her cheek. Her breath hitched, and her gaze, wide and clear, held his. It was a moment suspended in time, a quiet promise hanging between them. Later that evening, warmed by Sarah's stew and the crackling fire, Riley sat sketching in her notebook, capturing the rugged beauty of the ranch. Jack watched her, a comfortable silence settling between them. "What are you drawing?" he asked softly. She looked up, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Just the way the light hits the barn. It's peaceful here, Jack. Really peaceful." She paused, her gaze drifting to his face. "You've got a good life here. A good family." A faint shadow, fleeting but perceptible, crossed Jack's features. "It is," he agreed, his voice a little quieter than before. He picked up a piece of kindling wood, running his thumb over the rough grain. "We've had our share of tough times like anyone, but we get by." He didn't elaborate, and Riley, sensing a shift, didn't press. She simply nodded, her eyes lingering on his face for a moment longer than necessary, a faint flicker of curiosity in their depths. The moment passed, but a tiny seed of unanswered question had been planted in her mind. Chapter 5. A Shadow Lengthens. The week stretched into 2, then 3. Riley found reasons to stay, and Jack found himself inventing more. They rode together, explored hidden canyons, and shared stories under the vast, star-dusted sky. Riley began to notice the subtle shifts in Jack, moments when a quiet melancholy would settle over his eyes, or when a question about his past would be met with a carefully neutral response. He was open, kind, and fiercely protective, but there was a part of him, a deep, guarded place, that remained just out of reach. One blustery afternoon, a rider approached the ranch, kicking up a plume of dust. It was old Jebediah, the postman from Indian Creek, a man whose face was as craggy as the Badlands. He dismounted slowly, his gaze sweeping over Jack with an unreadable expression. "Jack," Jebediah said, his voice raspy, "got something for you. Been sitting at the post office a while." He handed over a thick, official-looking envelope, its edges worn, the return address smudged but vaguely familiar. Jack took it, his hand suddenly heavy. Riley, who had been watering the horses nearby, noticed the immediate stiffening of his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. The easy warmth that had been between them moments before evaporated, replaced by a sudden, chilling tension. "Everything all right, Jack?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the envelope, his thumb tracing the unfamiliar seal. "Yeah, just some old business." He shoved it into his pocket, a little too quickly, and turned back to the horses, his movements abrupt. Riley watched him, a knot forming in her stomach. He was usually so transparent, so open in his emotions, but now a wall had gone up. She saw the subtle tremor in his hand as he adjusted Buck's bridle, the way his eyes darted away from hers. Later that evening, she found him sitting alone on the porch, the envelope clutched in his hand, unread. The light from the setting sun cast long, distorted shadows, making him seem smaller, more burdened. "Jack," she ventured, sitting beside him, the wood of the swing creaking softly. "You seem troubled. Is there anything you want to talk about?" He sighed, a heavy, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. He looked out at the darkening landscape, his gaze distant. It's nothing, Riley. Just some old ghosts rattling their chains." He tried for a reassuring smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Doesn't concern you." "But it concerns you," she countered gently, her hand instinctively reaching for his, her fingers intertwining with his rough ones. "And if it concerns you, it concerns me. We've shared so much these past weeks. Please, Jack, let me in." He turned to her then, his eyes filled with a raw, vulnerable emotion she hadn't seen before. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it, a silent battle raging within him. The envelope felt like a lead weight in his hand, a tangible link to a past he desperately wanted to keep buried. But looking into Riley's clear, trusting eyes, he knew, with a sudden, painful clarity, that the time for hiding was rapidly coming to an end. The shadow was lengthening, and soon it would engulf the both of them. Chapter 6. The Unspoken Truth. The next morning, the air was thick with unspoken tension. Jack was up before dawn, working with a frantic energy, avoiding Riley's gaze. She watched him from the kitchen window, a sense of dread coiling in her gut. The envelope, which he had finally opened, lay on the small table in his room, a single sheet of paper peeking out. She hadn't read it, wouldn't dare, but its presence felt like a physical barrier between them. After a silent breakfast, Jack announced he was riding out to check the north pasture, his voice clipped, his movements stiff. Billy, sensing the strained atmosphere, quickly volunteered to go with him. Riley watched them ride off, her heart aching with a mixture of frustration and fear. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that whatever was in that letter was tearing at him. Unable to bear the silence and the weight of her own thoughts, Riley sought out Sarah. She found her in the garden, tending to her roses, the morning sun warm on her face. "Sarah," Riley began, her voice hesitant. Is Jack all right? He seems different." Sarah sighed, her gaze softening as she looked at Riley. "Jack carries a heavy burden, child. Always has. There's a past he rarely speaks of." She paused, clipping a dead rose. "He was wild once. A good heart, but a restless spirit. Got himself into some trouble a long time ago, before he came back to the ranch, for good." Riley felt a cold dread wash over her. "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" Sarah shook her head gently. "That's his story to tell, not mine. But it changed him. Made him the man he is today, for better or worse. He's always been afraid of it catching up to him, of it hurting the people he cares about." Her eyes met Riley's, filled with a deep understanding. "He cares about you, Riley. More than he's cared about anyone in a long time." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Riley's mind reeled, piecing together the fragments. Jack's guardedness, the way he flinched at certain questions, the sudden appearance of the letter, a wild past. Trouble. What could it be? Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and a fierce need to understand. Hours later, Jack and Billy returned, the sun already dipping towards the western peaks. Jack dismounted, his face grim, His eyes shadowed. He saw Riley waiting on the porch, her expression resolute, and knew the moment had come. "Jack," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We need to talk. About that letter. About your past." He walked towards her slowly, every step heavy with resignation. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the crumpled envelope, the single sheet of paper now fully visible. He handed it to her, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains, unable to meet her eyes. Riley took the paper, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. The words swam before her, stark and official. A warrant. For his arrest. For a crime committed years ago in a town far from Montana. The charge, theft and assault. Her breath caught in her throat. The paper slipped from her grasp, fluttering to the porch floor like a fallen leaf. She looked at Jack, her blue eyes wide with shock, betrayal, and a sudden, heartbreaking realization. The man she was falling in love with, the steady, honorable rancher, carried a past that threatened to shatter everything between them. The silence stretched, vast and unforgiving under the darkening Montana sky. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The warrant, stark and official, lay between them on the weathered porch floor, a flimsy barrier against the vast, darkening Montana sky. Riley's breath hitched, a sharp, painful gasp that felt torn from her chest. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of shock and a dawning, terrible understanding, darted from the paper to Jack's grim face. The words, theft and assault, echoed in the sudden, suffocating silence, each syllable a hammer blow to her heart. "Jack," she whispered, her voice barely a tremor. "What is this? What does this mean?" The betrayal was a bitter taste on her tongue, mingling with a desperate need for him to explain, to make sense of the impossible. He finally met her gaze, his own eyes shadowed with a profound despair she hadn't seen before, a raw vulnerability that tore at her. "It means," he began, his voice rough, strained, "it means my past has finally caught up." He sank onto the porch swing, the wood groaning under his weight, his shoulders slumped in a way that spoke of years of carrying this secret. Riley knelt, picking up the paper, her fingers tracing the cold, impersonal print. "Tell me," she urged, her voice gaining strength, a fierce determination pushing through the shock. "Tell me everything. Now." He took a deep, shuddering breath, his gaze fixed on the distant, purple-hued mountains, as if drawing strength from their unyielding presence. "It was years ago, Riley. Before I came back here for good. I was younger, hot-headed, full of fire and not much sense." He paused, searching for the right words. "I was working a small ranch down in Wyoming, near a town called Red Rock. A friend of mine, a young woman, she was being harassed by a group of men. They were trying to strong-arm her out of her land, her inheritance. Said she owed them money, debts her father supposedly left behind." His voice grew quieter, tinged with a bitter memory. "One night they came to her place, drunk and mean. They were tearing things up, threatening her. I couldn't stand by. I went in. There was a fight. A bad one." He rubbed a hand over his jaw as if reliving the blows. "I managed to get them off her property, but one of them, he had a strongbox, full of her family's savings. I grabbed it, threw it into the creek to keep them from taking it, and I hit him. Hard. Harder than I meant to. He went down." Jack finally turned to her, his eyes pleading for understanding. "They called it theft for taking the strongbox, even though I threw it away, and assault for defending her. They had connections, those men, powerful ones. I knew I couldn't fight it then. I was just a kid, no money, no one to back me up, so I ran, came back here hoping to start fresh, to build a life where that wouldn't follow me." His voice cracked. "I never stole anything, Riley. Not really. I was trying to protect her. And I never meant to hurt anyone that bad." Riley listened, her heart aching with a complex mix of emotions. The shock was still there, but now, a wave of fierce protectiveness began to rise. She saw the pain in his eyes, the genuine remorse, the burden he had carried alone for so long. The wild past Sarah had hinted at wasn't reckless malice, but a desperate act of courage. She reached out, her hand covering his. "Oh, Jack," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Why didn't you tell me?" He squeezed her hand, his gaze still holding hers. "I was afraid. Afraid you'd look at me differently. Afraid you'd leave. Afraid you'd see the man I was then, not the man I'm trying to be now." A tear traced a path down Riley's dusty cheek. "I could never leave you for that, Jack. Not for defending someone who needed it." She paused, a new resolve hardening her features. "What are we going to do?" Just then, the screen door creaked open, and Sarah stepped out, followed by Billy. They had heard enough. Sarah's face was etched with concern, but her eyes held an unwavering love for her son. Billy, usually quiet, stood tall, his jaw set. "We stand by him," Sarah said, her voice firm, her gaze sweeping over Jack and then settling on Riley, a silent plea for understanding. "Always." Billy nodded. "He's telling the truth, Riley. Jack's a good man. Always has been." Riley looked from Jack to his family, their faces united in their quiet support. The betrayal she'd felt moments ago dissolved, replaced by a profound sense of connection, a shared burden. She knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in her soul, that this was not the end. This was just the beginning of their fight. Chapter 8. A Plan and a Journey. The decision, though difficult, was swift and unanimous. Running was no longer an option. The warrant, a physical manifestation of Jack's past, had forced their hand. He had to go back to Red Rock, to face the charges and to clear his name, not just for himself, but for the future he now dared to imagine with Riley. "I can't ask you to come with me, Riley," Jack said later that night, his voice low as they sat on the porch swing, the stars blazing like scattered diamonds above them. "This is my fight. It's dangerous, and there's no telling what I'll find there." Riley turned to him, her hand finding his in the darkness. "You don't have to ask, Jack. I'm coming. You think I'd let you face this alone after everything? After you finally trusted me enough to tell me?" Her grip tightened. "We're in this together. Besides," she added, a faint, determined smile touching her lips, "I'm pretty handy in a tight spot, and I know a thing or two about finding what's lost." He pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of pine and something uniquely hers. "Thank you, Riley. More than you know." The words were muffled, but the gratitude in his voice was clear. Over the next few days, the Hudson Ranch became a hub of quiet, purposeful activity. Sarah packed provisions, dried meat, hardtack, coffee, and a small, precious tin of her apple pie. Thomas meticulously checked the wagon, reinforcing the axles and oiling the wheels. Billy, with a solemn determination, helped Jack prepare the horses, ensuring they were strong and well-shod for the long journey ahead. "We'll send word when we can," Jack promised his parents, his voice thick with emotion as they stood by the wagon at dawn. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of wood smoke. Sarah hugged him fiercely, then turned to Riley, her eyes brimming. "You take care of him, child, and yourself." "I will, Sarah," Riley promised, her voice steady. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, a fierce loyalty to this family that had welcomed her, and to the man who had finally opened his heart. The journey to Red Rock would be long, crossing vast stretches of open country, through mountain passes and dusty plains. They planned their route carefully, marking out watering holes and potential campsites. Jack explained the lay of the land, the towns they'd pass through, the dangers they might encounter. Riley listened, absorbing every detail, her mind already working, trying to anticipate challenges. One evening, camped by a small, gurgling creek, the fire casting dancing shadows on their faces, Jack looked at Riley, his expression softened by the flickering light. "You know," he said, "you're the bravest woman I've ever met." Riley chuckled softly. "And you, Jack Hudson, are the most stubborn, but I wouldn't have it any other way." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. The shared adversity, The looming uncertainty, instead of tearing them apart, seemed to forge their bond into something stronger, more resilient. Each mile they traveled together, each whispered conversation under the stars, deepened the roots of their connection, a quiet, unwavering promise that they would face whatever came next, side by side. Chapter 9. Back to the past. The landscape shifted with each passing day, the familiar rolling hills of Montana gradually giving way to the harsher, more unforgiving terrain of Wyoming. The air grew drier, the sagebrush more sparse, and the mountains rose in jagged, formidable peaks on the horizon, their shadows long and stark. The journey was arduous, filled with long hours of silent travel, broken only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the rhythmic thud of the horses' hooves. Riley watched Jack, noticing the subtle changes in him as they drew closer to his past. His jaw was often set, his gaze distant, and a new tension seemed to coil in his shoulders. He spoke less, his thoughts clearly preoccupied, and sometimes she would catch him staring out at the desolate landscape, a haunted look in his eyes. She knew he was reliving those difficult memories, bracing himself for what lay ahead. They spoke little of the warrant itself or the details of the crime. Instead, they focused on the practicalities of the journey, on the small moments of shared comfort. Riley would hum soft tunes as she prepared their meager meals, and Jack would carve small, intricate figures from stray pieces of wood, his hands finding solace in the familiar rhythm of the blade. One evening he carved a tiny, perfect goat, its horns delicately curved, and handed it to her. "For luck," he murmured, his eyes meeting hers, a rare, tender smile on his lips. Riley clutched the carving, a surge of warmth spreading through her chest. "Thank you, Jack. It's beautiful." It was a silent affirmation of their bond, a fragile hope in the face of daunting odds. As they drew nearer to Red Rock, the signs of human habitation became more frequent, scattered homesteads, then larger ranches, and finally, the faint outline of a town in the distance. Jack pointed it out, his voice flat. "That's it, Red Rock." The town itself was a dusty, sun-baked collection of wooden buildings, smaller and more weathered than Indian Creek. The main street was wider, the dust deeper, and a palpable sense of weariness seemed to cling to the air. As they drove their wagon slowly down the main thoroughfare, past the saloon, the general store, and the sheriff's office, Riley felt a chill despite the warm sun. The silence here was different. It wasn't peaceful, but watchful, almost oppressive. Jack's grip on the reins tightened, his knuckles white. He kept his hat pulled low, his gaze sweeping the street, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. Riley sensed his unease, the way every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat. They pulled the wagon into a small, discreet livery stable on the edge of town, a place Jack remembered from his youth. The stable hand, a grizzled old man with a perpetually squinting eye, looked them over, his gaze lingering on Jack for a moment too long. "Ain't seen you round these parts in a while, son," the stable hand rasped, his voice devoid of warmth. "Thought you'd gone for good." Jack offered a curt nod, his voice carefully neutral. "Just passing through, Jeb." He avoided the man's direct gaze, quickly turning to unhitch the horses. Riley felt a prickle of unease. Jebediah clearly recognized him. This wasn't going to be easy. As they walked towards the general store, needing supplies, Jack kept his head down, his hand resting subtly on the pistol at his hip. The few townsfolk they passed offered wary glances, some openly staring. It was clear Jack Hudson was not forgotten in Red Rock. Inside the general store, the air was thick with the scent of flour and leather. As Jack gathered a few essentials, a man emerged from the back, his eyes narrowing as he caught sight of Jack. He was older now, his face lined, but Riley recognized the cruel set of his mouth from Jack's description. This was one of the men from that night, the one Jack had hit. "Well, well, well," the man sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "If it isn't Jack Hudson, thought you'd never show your face around Red Rock again, you thieving snake." His gaze flickered to Riley, a lecherous glint in his eyes. Looks like you brought yourself a pretty little distraction this time. Jack stiffened, his hand instinctively tightening on Riley's arm, pulling her slightly behind him. His eyes, cold and hard, met the man's. The unspoken truth of his past had finally materialized, not as a whisper, but as a venomous hiss in the heart of Red Rock. This was just the beginning. Chapter 10. The Unraveling. The General Store. The air crackled with the raw, venomous energy emanating from the man Jack had called Silas. His sneer twisted his already cruel features, and his eyes, small and dark, raked over Riley with an unsettling possessiveness that made her skin crawl. Jack's hand, a protective vice on her arm, tightened, pulling her further behind him. "Get out of here, Silas." Jack's voice was a low growl, laced with a dangerous edge Riley hadn't heard before. "You got no business with us." Silas merely chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "No business? I got plenty of business with you, Hudson, and it looks like the law's finally caught up to your thieving hide." He took a step forward, his gaze fixed on Jack. "Heard you were back. Been waiting for this day." Before the confrontation could escalate further, a new voice cut through the tension, calm and authoritative. "What's going on here, Silas?" Sheriff Brody, a man with a weary face and a star pinned to his vest, emerged from the back of the store, his hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept over the scene, lingering on Jack. Recognition flickered in their depths, followed by a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Sheriff," Silas began, his voice suddenly oily. "Just apprehending a known criminal. Jack Hudson back in town. Got a warrant out for his arrest, don't you remember?" Brody's gaze hardened as he looked at Jack. "I remember, Silas. And I remember a lot of things about that night." "Jack," he said, his voice devoid of malice but firm. "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to come down to the office. We need to sort this out." Riley felt a cold dread seize her. "No, Sheriff, you can't. He didn't do what they say he did. He was defending someone." Her voice, though trembling, held a fierce conviction. Brody raised a hand, a gesture of weary patience. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but this is official business. We'll hear him out, but he needs to come with me now." Jack squeezed Riley's hand, a silent promise in his eyes. "It's all right, Riley, I'll go. It's time." He turned to Brody, his shoulders straightening. "I'll come quietly, Sheriff, but I want a fair hearing, and I want my story heard." "You'll get it," Brody assured him, though his gaze flickered to Silas, a hint of disdain in his eyes. As Jack was led away, Riley felt a surge of helplessness, quickly replaced by a burning resolve. She wouldn't let him face this alone. She watched as Silas smirked, a triumphant glint in his eyes. "You think you're so smart, little lady," Silas sneered, stepping closer to Riley. "You don't know who you're dealing with. Jack Hudson's a criminal, and he's gonna pay." Riley met his gaze, her blue eyes blazing with a fire he clearly hadn't anticipated. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Mr. Silas, and I know a liar when I see one. Jack Hudson is a good man, and I'm going to prove it. You won't get away with this." She turned on her heel, leaving Silas fuming in the dusty aisle. Her mind raced. Jack had mentioned a young woman. He had defended her. That was her starting point. She needed to find this woman, the one whose life Jack had risked everything to protect. She walked purposefully towards the saloon, remembering the whispers and knowing that in any small town the truth, however buried, always had a way of leaving traces. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with smoke and the clatter of poker chips. Riley approached the barkeep, a grizzled man with a kind face. "Excuse me," she began, her voice low and steady. "I'm looking for a young woman who used to live around here a few years back. Jack Hudson. He helped her. Her family had some land troubles." The barkeep's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of understanding. "You mean Elara Vance? She don't live in town anymore, ma'am. Moved out to a small cabin up in the hills after everything." He gave her directions, his gaze lingering on her with a newfound respect. "She's a good girl, Elara. Always was. What happened to her was a shame." Riley thanked him, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Elara Vance, the key to Jack's freedom. She procured a horse from the livery, ignoring Jebediah's suspicious glances, and rode out of Red Rock, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery hues, a stark contrast to the cold fear coiling in her stomach. The path was winding, leading her deeper into the rugged hills, but Riley pressed on, determined. She would find Elara, and together they would unravel the lies that bound Jack. Chapter 11. The Truth Unearths. The cabin was small and weathered, nestled deep within a secluded copse of pines, almost swallowed by the encroaching wilderness. Smoke curled lazily from its stone chimney, a sign of life. Riley dismounted, her heart thrumming a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She knocked gently on the wooden door, the sound echoing in the quiet twilight. The door creaked open, revealing a young woman with tired but kind eyes. Her face was thin, etched with a quiet sadness, but there was a spark of resilience in her gaze. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft. "Elara Vance?" Riley asked, her voice gentle. "My name is Riley Bannon. I'm a friend of Jack Hudson's." At the mention of Jack's name, Elara's eyes widened, a flicker of fear mixed with surprise. She hesitated, her gaze darting past Riley to the darkening woods. "Jack? Is he all right?" "He's in trouble, Elara," Riley explained, her voice urgent but steady. "He's back in Red Rock. There's a warrant for his arrest for what happened that night. He told me everything. He needs your help." Elara's face crumpled, a wave of old pain washing over her. She stepped back, inviting Riley inside. The cabin was sparse but clean, smelling faintly of herbs and wood smoke. Over a cup of weak tea, Riley recounted Jack's story, adding details of his current predicament. Elara listened, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I always knew this day might come," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Silas and his brothers, they never let anything go. They wanted my land, my grandmother's legacy. They tried to say my father owed them money, but it was all lies. Jack, he was the only one who stood up for me." A tear traced a path down her cheek. "He saved me that night. He truly did." "Then you have to tell the sheriff," Riley urged, her voice firm. "Your testimony can clear his name. It's the truth, Elara." Elara wrung her hands. "It's not that simple, Riley. Silas's family, the McCordys, they have a lot of power in this town. The sheriff, he's a good man, but he's beholden to them. And they threatened me, said if I ever spoke a word they'd make sure I lost everything, even this cabin." "But if you don't speak, Jack will lose everything," Riley countered, her voice gentle but insistent. "He risked his life for you. Now it's your turn to help him." She saw the conflict in Elara's eyes, the fear battling with a deep sense of loyalty and justice. Finally, Elara took a shaky breath. "There's something else. Silas's brother, Jed. He was the one Jack hit. He was always the worst of them. After that night Jed got sick. He was always sickly, but Silas blamed Jack. Said Jack's blow nearly killed him. But Jed, he used to keep a journal. He wrote everything down, even about the McCordys' schemes, about how they tried to cheat people out of their land." She looked at Riley, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I think I know where he kept it. If we can find that, it might prove everything." The next morning, under the cloak of pre-dawn darkness, Riley and Elara made their way to an abandoned, dilapidated shack on the outskirts of town, a place Elara remembered Jed McCordy using as a hideout. The air was cold and damp, and every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside seemed magnified. After a tense search, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, they found it. A small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Back at Elara's cabin, by the flickering light of a single lamp, they read. The journal was a meticulous record of Jed's life, his grievances, and, crucially, the McCordys' illicit dealings, their intimidation tactics, their fabricated debts, and the true events of that fateful night, including Silas's plan to frame Jack and the fact that Jed's injuries were largely due to a pre-existing condition exacerbated by alcohol, not solely Jack's blow. It was the irrefutable evidence they needed. With the journal clutched tightly in her hand, Riley rode back to Red Rock, Alara by her side, her face pale but resolute. They went straight to Sheriff Brody's office. He listened intently, his expression unreadable, as Riley presented the journal and Alara recounted her story, her voice gaining strength with each word. Just as Brody finished reading the last entry, the door burst open. Silas, flanked by two burly men, stormed in, his face contorted with rage. "What's going on here, Sheriff? What's this woman doing here?" His eyes fell on Alara, then on the journal in Brody's hand, and a look of pure panic flashed across his face. "That's a lie! All lies!" "Is it, Silas?" Brody asked, his voice low and dangerous. He stood, the journal held aloft. "This journal tells a different story, your brother's story, and it paints a very clear picture of your family's business practices and what really happened that night." Silas lunged, but Brody was quicker, his hand already on his pistol. "Don't even think about it, McCordy. This is over." The truth, long buried, had finally come to light. Jack was released later that afternoon, the charges against him dropped. He walked out of the sheriff's office into the late afternoon sun, blinking against the light, and saw Riley waiting, Alara beside her. His heart soared. He rushed to her, pulling her into a fierce embrace, burying his face in her hair. "You did it, Riley," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me." She pulled back, tears streaming down her face, a joyous, relieved smile on her lips. "We did it, Jack. We did it together." Alara, standing quietly beside them, offered a small, grateful smile. The shadow had lifted, and in its place a fragile, beautiful hope began to bloom. Her mind raced. Jack had mentioned a young woman. He had defended her. That was her starting point. She needed to find this woman, the one whose life Jack had risked everything to protect. She walked purposefully towards the saloon, remembering the whispers and knowing that in any small town, the truth, however buried, always had a way of leaving traces. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with smoke and the clatter of poker chips. Riley approached the barkeep, a grizzled man with a kind face. "Excuse me," she began, her voice low and steady. "I'm looking for a young woman who used to live around here a few years back. Jack Hudson. He helped her. Her family had some land troubles." The barkeep's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of understanding. "You mean Alara Vance? She don't live in town anymore, ma'am. Moved out to a small cabin up in the hills after everything." He gave her directions, his gaze lingering on her with a newfound respect. "She's a good girl, Alara. Always was. What happened to her was a shame." Riley thanked him, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Alara Vance, the key to Jack's freedom. She procured a horse from the livery, ignoring Jebediah's suspicious glances, and rode out of Red Rock, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery hues, a stark contrast to the cold fear coiling in her stomach. The path was winding, leading her deeper into the rugged hills, but Riley pressed on, determined. She would find Alara, and together they would unravel the lies that bound Jack. Chapter 12. A New Dawn. The news of Jack Hudson's exoneration spread like wildfire through Red Rock. The McCordy family's reputation, once built on fear and intimidation, crumbled under the weight of Jed's journal and Alara Vance's brave testimony. Sheriff Brody, no longer beholden to their influence, launched a full investigation into their illicit dealings, and soon Silas and his remaining cronies found themselves facing charges far more serious than the one Jack had endured. Justice, slow but sure, had finally arrived in Red Rock. Jack and Riley stayed in Red Rock for another week, ensuring Alara was safe and that the legal proceedings against the McCordys were firmly in motion. Alara, freed from years of fear, began to rebuild her life, and a quiet friendship blossomed between the three of them. But the vast, open spaces of Montana called to Jack, and the familiar hum of the Hudson Ranch beckoned to Riley. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Red Rock sky in fiery streaks of orange and gold, Jack and Riley sat on a small hill overlooking the town, the wind whispering through the dry grass. The air was cool, carrying the scent of dust and distant pine. "It's time to go home, isn't it?" Riley said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. Jack wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "It is. But I don't want to go home alone anymore, Riley." He shifted, turning to face her, his eyes, usually so guarded, now shining with a profound love and a hopeful vulnerability. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, intricately carved wooden rose, its petals delicate and perfectly formed. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever made. "Riley Bannon," he began, his voice a little shaky but filled with unwavering conviction. "You rode into my life on a dusty road and turned my world upside down. You saw past my fears, past my past, and you fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. You are the bravest, kindest, most stubborn woman I know, and I can't imagine a single day without you by my side." He took her hand, placing the wooden rose in her palm. "Will you do me the honor of being my wife? Will you come home with me and build a new life, a new chapter together?" Riley's eyes welled with tears, a joyous, overwhelming wave of emotion washing over her. She looked at the rose, then at Jack's earnest, hopeful face. "Oh, Jack," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes!" She threw her arms around him, holding him tight, the wooden rose clutched in her hand. Their wedding was a simple, heartfelt affair back at the Hudson Ranch, under the vast, benevolent Montana sky. Sarah had outdone herself with the apple pies, and Thomas for once was seen with a wide, genuine smile. Billy, now a proud best man, stood tall beside his brother. Ilara, having made the long journey from Red Rock, was Riley's bridesmaid, her presence a testament to the truth that had set them all free. Riley wore a simple, cream-colored dress, her silver hair adorned with wildflowers, and Jack, in his best suit, looked at her as if she were the sunrise itself. They exchanged vows under a makeshift arch woven with pine boughs and wild roses, their promises echoing across the open land. Life on the Hudson Ranch, now the Hudson Bannon Ranch, settled into a new harmonious rhythm. Riley's goats, with their quirky personalities, mingled with Jack's cattle, creating a lively, bustling homestead. They built a small, new cabin near the main farmhouse, a testament to their shared future. Jack pursued his bull riding career, winning big money and prizes. He decided to give back to the Indian Creek community by building a school and a library. He also taught lessons in calf roping to the teenage boys. Life was good at the ranch, filled with the scent of fresh-cut wood and the promise of new beginnings. Whispered on the Montana winds was clear. True courage wasn't just about fighting for your side of things all the time, but about facing all the mistakes in your past, allowing yourself to be led by the spirit of the truth. And sometimes, the most unexpected turns lead you to the most beautiful destinations, where love can bloom even in the dustiest corners of the world. Jack and Riley, hand in hand, facing the vast, open future, knew that their journey had just truly begun, and that the truth was the overcoming force that made them victorious. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on more captivating tales. Until next time, take care, stay safe, and God bless. See you in the next video.